What's going on, everybody? Oh dear. Let's get that. I think we're live. I'm just gonna pause the music. That was a bit abrupt. I could have faded that out, but you know, what can I say? I'm not DJing today. We're here for another purpose. Can everybody hear me? I'm gonna need some interaction. It says that I've got 19 concurrent viewers at the moment. So 19 viewers at the moment, but I don't know if anyone can hear me or if I'm talking to myself. I have to always check. Why has it not started yet? Has it started? Okay, I think we're live. Brilliant. Okay, so I got some feedback for Kapruki, loud and clear. Thank you very much, my brother. Wesley can hear me. Okay, brilliant. I think we're live. I think we are live and audible, so that's exciting. No problems. I don't think I can hear any echoes or anything, so I think we're good. So, yeah, what's up, everybody? It's really good to be back. It's been a long time, I'm not gonna lie. And just to give you a very, very quick rundown, I've been having some massive problems with my PC. As you guys know, it's constantly crashing and throwing me out. And in the end, it wasn't even that difficult to fix, so it's a little bit embarrassing. But Talia, what's going on? Good to see you. The Black Sea, good to see everybody. Good to see everybody. Aket, all these people, yeah, all these familiar faces. It's so fantastic to see you all, Lauren. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. And please do get interactive. This is going to be a really good one. But anyway, just a quick digest before I kind of go off in another direction. Basically, what it was my PC was being overrun with like USBs, and they were draining all the energy out of my PC. So in order to solve it, it was actually really easy. All I had to do was get a powered USB hub so that the hub was powering all of my devices. And since I've done that, my PC is sailing. So I'm really happy. I've given everybody that story about 10 times, who knows me. But yeah, I'm in a really good place. So I've got excellent, Happy New Year, King. I've got excellent internet connectivity. I've got a well-performing PC. And everything's good. So yeah, we're all good. I'm in a good place. So I was saying to the guys on the forum today, on the Discord forum. If you haven't joined that, by the way, you need to join it. There's so much good information there. I myself learn so much from those guys. They're always posting articles, having some really in-depth discussions, studies, pictures, like everything. It's just such a great place. And I'm not in there because I have to be. I'm in there because I want to be. So I just kind of like pop my head in, and there's always great conversations taking place. But anyway, I was saying to those guys today that by the end of the week, you're probably going to hate me because I imagine I'm going to do loads of these live streams to make up for lost time. That's how I'm kind of feeling at the moment. But yeah, that's it for the introduction. And I kind of want to get going. So I'm going to put a little bit of a poll out there to everyone who's online at the moment. So please do kind of get active in the chat. If you've watched the Twisted History of Bengal Cats video that I put out, I know it's really odd. So many of you would have seen it or would have come on your stream, and maybe the thumbnail, you wouldn't have recognized it was from me, or you would have recognized it was from me, but you just thought, oh, that topic doesn't really tickle my pickle. So maybe you saw it and you thought, I'm gonna give that a miss. But if you've watched it, I want you to just hit up the like button, because I want to see how many people actually have watched it. So if you watched the Twisted History of Bengal Cats, I just want you to hit up the like button, and I'm gonna see how many people who are in here at the moment who have seen it. Okay, we've got a few more people coming in now. Okay, I think this thing's a bit slow with the likes. Leave a comment. I'm going to say hit up the like button, or leave a comment. Okay, so I'm going to say you to do both. Okay, can you lob the Discord link? Yeah, I'm going to yes, I'm going to put a new Discord link in the chat. In fact, I'm probably going to be sharing a few links with you actually today, bearing that in mind. So if you haven't watched it, just to give a quick rundown, the twisted history of Bengal cats, it's really weird, but it's actually one of the most important one of the most important videos that I've created. And the reason it's one of the most important videos that I've created is because essentially it was my way of communicating to everybody who knows me or people who consume my content, communicating what I feel is basically where we are at the moment. I get all of these questions and people ask me, well, what's your view on this? What's your view on this civilization? What's your view on DNA? What's your view on this? And I answer all these questions over and over again, but it's impossible to kind of like keep a track of my very kind of very varied, nuanced perspective on history and my very varied perspective on politics and all of these different views. And so, Talia, thanks for watching it, by the way, and a few thumbs ups. I'm guessing you guys all watched it, which is fantastic. If you watch this video, then you're going to get a really good understanding of where I'm at. And you might not know straight away, because actually I put it out there. And the funny thing is I created the video and I thought to myself, everybody who watches this is going to instantly understand what it means. But then after I've kind of put it out there and I read the comments, I realized actually it's gone over quite a few heads. And I guess that's good, because that's kind of what you want a parable to do. You kind of want it to go over people's heads, allow people to come up with their own conclusions. So in a way, it's kind of evolved to become its own thing. And I think it's going to mean different things to different people. And that's actually okay. So all I'm going to do is give you my interpretation of it as a writer or as the person who created this story. But I'm quite happy for you to form your own interpretations and applications of what happens. And I'm sure you guys will, because I'm going to get some feedback. Someone's going to say something really profound to me and I'm going to go, blimey, I didn't think of that perspective. That's actually really interesting and probably more interesting than what I've come up with. So yeah, that's just to give a little bit of an overview so you know where I'm coming from. Now, I got two approaches for this video and I need your feedback for this. Thank you, Wesker, for sharing the Discord link. The Discord link is in the chat. I'm going to, well, I would pop it on the screen, but that's useless. I'm not going to pop it on the screen because what you got to do, look at the link. It's there to be clicked on. If you want to join the Discord, please do click on the link and join the Discord. Yeah, so my poll to you guys is this. We've got two ways we can do this. We can either watch the whole video through and then kind of start, watch it, and I give you my explanation as we go through. Or we can skip watching the whole video through and we can just start, watch it from the start. Now, I wasn't sure which one to do because it's not a very long video. I think it's 13. In fact, let me just double check. Right, I'll get it on the screen. The video is, let's see here, 11 minutes long. So it's 11 minutes long, the video. It's not the longest video in the world. And I think it would be valuable if you haven't watched it for you to watch it again. But if you've watched it already, you've got to kind of lose 11 minutes of your life. But that being said, you may need a reminder anyway of what content was in the video. And you might want to watch it again once through before we do it together. So put in the chat now. And I'm going to go with where the overwhelming consensus is. So wherever the overwhelming consensus is, if you guys say, no, just start your discourse or just start your chat, then I'll do that and I won't watch it through. Or if you guys want to watch it first, just say yes, watch it first, and then I'll do that. So I need some feedback. Yeah, it is the middle of the night where I'm at as well. It's like 20 to 10. It's late here, but I do that for my US audience. This is kind of like the path of least resistance when it comes to getting my UK and my US audience in together on a live stream. So come on, guys, give me some feedback. I think there's a bit of a delay between, there's a bit of a delay between where I'm at and where you guys are. But Let me know in the comments and the chat how you want to approach this, because that's what I'm going to do basically. So let me know in the chat how you want to approach this. And as soon as I got feedback on that, I think we'll get started. Aket says it's really short. Perp says I'm looking to buy a kitten next month, which is great. I need some feedback. King Henry says, let's watch it. Cool. I think it's the first to get the 3 votes. I think I'm going to go with. Aket says it's really short, but then he said it's late. So you're giving me mixed messages there. Let me know which one you're leaning towards. Shamani says she wants to watch it. And Joe Bailey says, watch again. Boom, there you go. That was the first of 3 votes. Okay, so we're there. So we're going to watch the whole video in its entirety, okay? And then we're going to do our breakdown afterwards. So this will be a kind of non-interrupted rewatch of the Bengal Dilemma. So I'm going to stop talking now. And I'm also going to remove my thingy-bob from the screen. Yep, brilliant. And here we go. So here is the Bengal Dilemma played back. By the way, as soon as you can hear it, let me know.
Before our tale begins, here are some important matters that must be addressed. First, I love Bengal cats. I actually have 2 cross Bengal cats of my own who are sisters. So this fictional story is an analogy and certainly not one born out of resentment towards Bengals or any other breed of cat to that end. This should not be taken as an attack on this beautiful breed of cat. With all that said, let us begin. Everybody loves cats. I mean, at least everyone who's not a dog, cat, or a fox. However, not everyone understands the significance of how presentism and the manipulation of information shape our perspectives. Yeah.
I'm just going to pause it quickly. Yeah, can hear it. So I was just making sure that everyone could hear it. Okay. All right, I'm going to play it now. We won't interrupt again.
Yes, these are 2 entirely different and seemingly disconnected subjects of how presentism and the manipulation of information shape our perspectives. Yes, these are 2 entirely different and seemingly disconnected subjects that are largely unrelated. But could I petition you to suspend your disbelief just for a moment as the wonderful world of felines and our complex history as humans collide in this simultaneously historic and prophetic cautionary tale? Welcome to the Bengal Delusion. This tale presents a new chapter in the story of domestic cats. The Bengal cat, a striking and modern breed, emerged from an innovative blend of the wild and the familiar. This journey started with the Asian leopard cat, a small but captivating wild cat native to Southwest Asia, known for its distinctive markings. The vision was to cross this wild beauty with everyday domestic cats and incorporate the elegant traits of other short-haired breeds like the Siamese, Abyssinian, Burmese, and Egyptian Mau. The goal was simple yet ambitious, to create a cat that mirrored the wild allure of a leopard in miniature form, but with the gentle nature of a household pet. Breeders were driven by more than just the creation of a new cat breed. They sought to provide a compelling alternative to the trend of keeping wild cats as pets. The Bengal cat, with its leopard-like spots and sweet demeanor, became a symbol of this balance, a wild appearance with a domestic heart. No one could have predicted the success of the Bengal cat. It took only a few years for Bengal cats to become the dominant breed in Europe, establishing themselves as the preference of cat owners continent-wide. First among the rich, but then this preference diffused to the general public to the point where very few pet owners sought to own cats that weren't, if not pedigree, at least considerably crossed with Bengal cats. This went on for some time. Years became decades, and decades became centuries. Over time, it began to be the general belief that all domestic breeds in Europe had always been of Bengal stock. The knowledge of their Asian origin was now unknown to the general public and snubbed by historians. Common domestic cats like tabbies and even the elegant Egyptian Mau were now regarded as ugly, clumsy, and to some, even dumb. In contrast, the Bengal was hailed for its beauty, rosettes, and superior intelligence. However, as present became history, historians began to uncover historical artworks, photographs, and even ancient pet cemeteries across Europe, which made it abundantly clear that Bengals were not the preferred species of the continent historically. In fact, beyond a certain point in history, it became apparent that there was no trace of Bengals even existing. But this couldn't be correct, could it? Well, in a world heavily biased and invested in the preeminence of this particular breed, this was a truth too hard to swallow. This uncomfortable truth upset Bengal owners who took pride in their beautiful and dominant breed of cat, whose long necks, slender bodies and rosettes were now seen as the epitome of feline beauty, even though they inherited those long necks and slender bodies from older domestic cat species such as the Egyptian Mau, who were largely preferred as breeding mates with the leopard cats in the early days of establishing the pedigree. Not only that, their attractive rosettes, which they obviously gained from their leopard cat ancestors, were also now adored and admired in isolation, regarded as an independent, spontaneous evolutionary leap, developed in isolation of other breeds. These borrowed traits were now being assigned to and owned by the Bengal. Scientists decided, due to the broadness of these traits, to coin a new term, Bengaloid, as a way to simply communicate when any of these traits were seen in what was pre-Bengal society. This connected the relatively new breed of cat to a world that predated its existence and thus dealt with the troublesome problem of anthropology. As such, any occurrence of physical attributes like rosettes, slender bodies, or even intelligent behavior exhibited in cats anywhere were now to be regarded as Bengaloid features. At the other end of the spectrum, domestic cats bore the brunt of the Bengal owners' historical delusions. They were largely classified as Felioid as opposed to Bengaloid, and these two meaningless terms dominated anthropological discourse. Thus, short limbs, plain bodies, or, God forbid, stripes, basically anything uncommon in Bengal cats, were now considered Felioid, which, broadly speaking, was seen as ugly or vulgar to the Bengaloid-leaning European public. The previously popular tabby was aggressively singled out for scorn, being regarded as particularly ugly. Ironically, it had once been regarded as the darling of Europe. Photos, literature, and cemeteries were filled with the remnants of the tabby cat. Artworks were rife with tabby paintings and iconography, and literature spoke of the beauty of tabby cats and their prowess for mousing and domestication across the continent. However, not satisfied with the already dominant position of the Bengal breed, the Bengal owners worried immensely about a renaissance of tabby keeping in Europe. So they decided to ensure that the tabby was replaced and removed from history completely. Paintings depicting this once loved cat species were retouched, with stripes being replaced by rosettes. Cat bones exhibiting tabby traits were classified as Bengaloid as soon as any sign of slimness was exhibited, and the ones that were unpassable were either destroyed, classified as a visiting migrant breed, or absorbed some other way to fit into the revisionist Bengal ideological history. More insidiously, since the tabby was being effectively erased from the continent, the Bengal owners set about installing an atmosphere of negative propaganda against the tabby cat. Academicians of all walks were sponsored to legitimize and even invent scientific reasoning to support its unsuitable nature for domestication. It was now seen as an entirely foreign species, portrayed in the media as a slow, lumbering, dull cat, with an aptitude for uncouth behavior, and history was changed to declare it was only ever imported into Europe on a small scale as a cheap alternative to farmers for ratting. Tabbies were soon targeted, rounded up, and shipped abroad. The ones that remained were given to farmers or used for hunting games. They were placed in storage facilities and over time began to lose the very domesticated nature they were once loved for. Becoming more and more wild, they eventually adopted more of their instinctual wild traits. Some would call it an evolutionary survival adaptation. The cruel reality of their present status was then back applied to their history, And soon their many years as the beloved favourites of Europe was discarded and replaced by the global belief that they were a breed that was bred for slaughter, and they were suitable for nothing more. The turn of the new century saw the advent of DNA testing, and Bengal owners who were by now none the wiser about the true history of cats were excited about the prospect of testing their cats' DNA to find its origins and common ancestors. Leopard cats, being wild and not domestically bred, are not as numerous as the Bengals. In fact, they keep relatively low numbers as a species. However, because they are so old, they are also incredibly genetically diversified, with each small group carrying unique genetic markers to the next. Whereas the Bengal breed, since they all descended from a few recent common ancestors, had very high frequency of very few markers. One such marker was the LC1 marker, which they inherited from their leopard cat ancestor. They nearly all possessed this marker, but very few leopard cats possessed it, in spite of its origins being thoroughly Asian and thoroughly belonging to the leopard cat. As a result, even though the LC1 marker had been carried by leopard cats as a breed far longer than it had been carried by Bengal cats, in proportion to their numbers and population, there are far fewer carriers of this lineage than amongst Bengal cats. So, eagerly, the Bengal-centric Europeans leapt onto this marker, unanimously claiming it as the Bengal marker. Cat owners across Europe, massively excited by the attribution of a marker that overwhelmingly, but not at all uniquely, identified their cat's breed, began to use this as a means to establish an older date of origin for the Bengal cat than the one historically and anthropologically known to be correct. Suddenly, any occurrence of LC1 uncovered by archaeologists at any time frame were classified as Bengaloid presence. Now, fanatic Bengal-centric historians had the scientific means to place Bengals at nearly any point in history, subsequently forcing the leopard cat to be increasingly written out and replaced by the industrious and now ancient Bengaloids. Leopard cat achievements in Asia were now also assigned to the Bengals of Europe via the quasi-application of this catch-all terminology. The deliberate falsification of genetic testing provided the fuzzy logic and credible delivery mechanism that was required to fool the world. Indeed, the application of this new science could now permanently place Bengal cats as the original and only cat species worth even discussing.
I think we're there.
Thank you for joining me on The King's Monologue.
So there you go. All right, so there it is. Play back in its entirety the Bengal dilemma. I hope that was okay to sit through. It was interesting to see some of the feedback as it was going on. I hope you all enjoyed that. Now, I'm going to dive straight in, but please do feel free to pop stuff in the comment, questions, feedback about how you interpret this tale, because it really does cover a lot. And actually, surprisingly, it's only partially in relation to Egyptology. This is more a story. In fact, actually, let me ask this question to everyone. This is a really good question. Who is this story about? Because this story does have a main character, and I want you to know from what I've shared with you and what you just heard in the video, who is the Bengal analogous to? So who's the Bengal an analogy of? That's probably quite an important question to ask. So I'm going to ask that question now. I know there's a little bit of a delay, so I don't mind waiting for a bit, because I want to see if anyone can just like dive straight in and go, boom, nah, that I get it. The Bengal is X, Y, Z. So I want to see, who do you believe the Bengal is an analogy of? It's damn delay. There is a delay, isn't it? Okay, so our cat says the Bengal is analogous to black people. Anyone else got any feedback or thoughts? Modern day Egyptians. See, this is so interesting, because this is, wow, this is so interesting. This is so interesting. So I've got black people, current day Egyptians. I think it reflects the historical attitude of colonizers to all indigenous people, King Henry said. That's three very different arguments. The story reminds me of gypsy history, but black people in general. So you think the Bengal are black people? Okay. Arab Egyptians, Black Sea said. Yeah, I figured it already, T-Mac says. I have no idea, but afterwards, please explain who the Tabbies are then. Okay, cool. So this is going to really surprise all of you because no one actually got the correct answer. Apart from Kapruki, who just comes in straight away and said, yes, modern day Europeans. The Bengal is an analogy for modern day Europeans. So this is where, so this is amazing because all of you have got stories in your head which fit and which make sense. But I'm going to tell you what was in my head when I made this story. So I'm going to play it from the start. We're going to kind of do a reaction. I'm going to be pausing. I'm going to be chatting because otherwise we're not going to cover everything. So I think it's important to cover everything. So this is what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to play it and I'm going to pause it. I'm going to play it. I'm going to pause it. So just bear with me. That's how we're going to work through today. But I am keeping my eye on the comments, so keep them coming and let's go.
Before our tale begins, here are some important matters that must be addressed.
Disclaimer. You know what's really funny about the disclaimer? I have to post it. I can't remember. Someone said, it's really sad that you have to post a disclaimer about how you love cats. And I was like, dude, you don't understand this country. In this country, you can kill a person, but I tell you, you can never kill a pet. They'll forgive you for killing a person if you say sorry hard enough. But I tell you right now, in this country, if you abuse a pet, you are done. So I had to post that disclaimer because that would have got me cancelled quicker.
I actually have two cross Bengal cats of my own who are sisters. So this fictional story is an analogy and certainly not one born out of resentment towards Bengals.
And I actually do have two Bengal cats of my own. That wasn't actually just made up. I've got two Bengal cats of my own. Love them very much. Actually, no, one of them is really irritating me at the moment because she's doing some weird stuff. When she's on heat, she's peeing, and I don't really like that. But anyway, I digress.
Or any other breed of cat to that end. This should not be taken as an attack on this beautiful breed of cat. With all that said, let us begin. Everybody loves cats. I mean, at least everyone who's not a dog, cat, or a fox. However, not everyone understands the significance of how presentism and the manipulation of information shape our perspectives.
Okay, so that's really important. I mentioned two terms there. I said presentism and the manipulation of information. These are two of some of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome. Presentism is a really fantastic term. I heard it actually only recently from a historian. It was actually a black historian. I might find his name somewhere if I dig out my drawers. But essentially he spoke about the fact that people always back apply whatever state they see things in. So presentism basically says this country is like this now, so it's always been like this. And presentism is something that actually occurs a lot in Egyptology, mainly amongst the general public, who will say, well, the Egyptians right now, they're all Arab, so they obviously were always Arab, and then when you come back and you're like, well, the Australians are all blonde, but they haven't always been blonde. It doesn't mean the Aboriginals are blonde, or, the Americans are all white, but it doesn't mean that they were white before. They were obviously, the different tones of the caramel or the copper skin tone of Native Americans, but I'm not going to go into all of that. But the point is that presentism is something that is used as a weapon against us telling our history. You also get the other thing, which is the manipulation of information, and that's going to come up. That's going to be a key theme as we go through this, how information is manipulated in order to tell a version of history that suits a certain person. Just like Brazilians. I'm assuming that's in regards to the statement I just made about presentism. Could be. There's a bit of a delay, but it makes sense if it is. But anyway, let me carry on letting it play.
Yes, these are two entirely different and seemingly disconnected subjects that are largely unrelated. But could I petition you to suspend your disbelief just for a moment as the wonderful world of felines and our complex history as humans collide in this simultaneously historic and prophetic cautionary tale? Welcome to the Bengal Delusion.
So it's quite funny. I also mentioned that it's a cautionary tale, and that might sound a little bit weird, but I don't know if any of you guys are fans of, I can't remember his name now. I always get brain blocks on doing these live streams. The one who wrote George Orwell. 1984. A lot of people are fans of that book. It's a really fantastic book, and a lot of people actually perceive 1984 to be a predictive or prophetic book, kind of like prophesying a dystopian future. But I actually interpret it different. Because of what I've now come to learn, I actually view 1984 as a history book. And I actually view that George Orwell is telling us of things that have already taken place. Because I'm just going to throw this out there. But does a person born into a dystopian society ever believe they're born into a dystopian society? Just think on that for a second. Does a person who's born into a dystopian society ever believe that they are born into a dystopian society? And I can tell you right now, the answer is no. Everybody thinks they're born into the equivalent of a free society, and it's becoming more dystopian. But if you go back a few years, the generation before is always going to view the state that the world in as being more autocratic and more dystopian than the one they were in before. And I actually believe that 1984 is telling us about things that occurred, such as the erasure and the burning of books and the banning of certain freedoms. I actually think this is telling us of something that took place, very actual, very really large events that took place in Europe that have been written out of history and that people don't know occurred, expulsions of certain people. So we'll come across some of that anyway. Let me play on.
This tale presents a new chapter in the story of domestic cats. The Bengal cat, a striking and modern breed, emerged from an innovative blend of the wild and the familiar. This journey started with the Asian leopard cat, a small but captivating wild cat native to Southwest Asia, known for its distinctive markings. The vision was to cross this wild beauty with everyday domestic cats and incorporate the elegant traits of other short-haired breeds like the Siamese, Abyssinian, Burmese, and Egyptian Mau.
Okay, so here we're talking about origins now. Now, this isn't exactly directly analogous, but essentially it's covering the fact that we are looking at the creation of a new breed. Okay, we're stumbling across the creation of a new breed, but that breed is not old, and that breed hasn't come from nowhere. It's come from existing breeds, and that's essentially how we come across the Bengal cat. And when you look at humanity, really, it sounds derogatory, but we have to look at humanity as a range of breeds, because essentially we're not different species. We can all interbreed with one another, and our children can have children, regardless of which two people in the world decide to interbreed with each other. So therefore, we are all a part of the same species. We are all a part of the same race, so to speak. But what you have is different breeds, and breeds are essentially just different flavors, different kind of phenotypic and slightly biologically different kind of aspects of humanity that you're dealing with. And when you're talking about the birth of the Bengal here, we're talking about the birth of a new breed. And I use this as an analogy for the kind of the conception of the European or the modern European race, the Aryan race, the white race. They are a very new race in history. If you look at the scientific clines, there you go, that is fantastic. Clines is the term. Different clines of humanity. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was actually reading Brace's report that he wrote in his 93 report about clines and clusters of I think it was of the ancient Egyptian whatever, and it's total rubbish. I was able to debunk it, but anyway, I'll do that in another video. But it's funny that you mentioned that word. But yes, so clines, different clines of humanity. But so you have the birth of the European race, and scientists agree this is a very modern phenomena. So modern Europeans are not old. They have a very recent conception date that dates back to about 6,000 years. It falls somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 years ago. We have the birth of the modern European. Now, if you take that comparatively with the modern African has been in their current form for at the least kind of exaggerated estimate, around 250,000 years. So comparatively, African people, melanated people on this earth have been here for, several factors longer than our European equivalents who are very new. It doesn't mean that they're aliens or they come from the sky. It essentially was a crossing of different clines of humanity. And when you also introduce the Neanderthal aspect, which we know plays a role because it's there genetically, this is what essentially gave us the modern day European. There's an aspect of the breeding with the Neanderthal, but then there was also a time or some kind of mutation that had to take place for the skin to then turn fair, and that's what created the modern European. But anyway, scientists agree that this dates back to about 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, so it's not extremely drawn out. It's relatively recent. So this kind of aspect of the video, or this part of the video, is dealing with how they came about and the fact that they came about from existing breeds. So like I said, they haven't come from anywhere. The modern Caucasian or Caucasus or European descends largely from the Asian, directly from the Asian, but obviously with African influence, because Africans is the birthplace of everywhere. So I'm not going to tell you what my belief about the kind of concoction that created the modern European. My belief is that it's specifically parts of the East African and West African genome, as well as Asian genome, that created, or that gave us the kind of like recent mutation that is the modern European. That's kind of like my aspect of how they got there. But there's kind of like, people have got different schools of thought. I'm not going to go into too much because I'm not a geneticist. I'm just giving you kind of my opinion on how that happened. But anyway, so that's that there. So I'm going to let it carry on playing now.
The goal was simple yet ambitious: to create a cat that mirrored the wild allure of a leopard in miniature form, but with the gentle nature of a household pet. Breeders were driven by more than just the creation of a new cat breed. They sought to provide a compelling alternative to the trend of keeping wild cats as pets. The Bengal cat, with its leopard-like spots and sweet demeanor, became a symbol of this balance, a wild appearance with a domestic heart.
Now, this part, or that part there that we just covered, is just essentially covering the fact that there is a period of proliferation and growth within the European continent of this new form of human being. Obviously, in my story, I've made it a thing of preference, but obviously in reality, it could have been a result of war, it could have been a result of expansion, it could have been a result of climactic adaptation. There are various reasons why that we don't need to go into for the sake of this story, but we're dealing with an expansion of this new cline of humankind. So that's essentially what this part is dealing with. So let's go.
No one could have predicted the success of the Bengal cat. It took only a few years for Bengal cats to become the dominant breed in Europe, establishing themselves as the preference of cat owners continent-wide. First among the rich, but then this preference diffused to the general public to the point where very few pet owners sought to own cats that weren't, if not pedigree, at least considerably crossed with Bengal cats.
So that's quite important there. So essentially, we're going to get to a point in history when Europe wasn't empty. We know that. Okay, so historically, Europe's never been empty. Europe was populated, as was Native America, as was Australia, as was, all of these lands. They were all populated lands, and Europe was a populated land. We know that historically. And what's quite interesting is you don't have to dig too far in any European nation. So we're talking about any of them, from the Nordic nations to particularly the Nordic nations, but I'm not going to go into that right now, to the, British Isles. I'm sure you guys have all seen Cheddar Man. Okay, you know what Cheddar Man looks like. You don't have to dig too far before you start digging up the Black Europeans, the native Black Europeans, the native Europeans of these lands, the people who were originally there. But over a course of time, and people are going to argue about how long that course of time is. I actually think it's very recent, but some people extend it to be in several thousand years. Once again, I'm not going to push too much on what my perspective is, because I think that the course of time doesn't matter hugely at this juncture that we're kind of discussing. But the point is that there's a population replacement that takes place. There's a dominance, okay, of this new breed, this new cline of human being into the European landmass. And what's happened as a result is the people that used to be there are essentially being replaced, or they're dying off. And there's kind of many artifacts and many things in European history to support the fact that the indigenous people of Europe, obviously prior to this European or this Caucasian expansion, were obviously people of color. That's goes without saying, because it's impossible they would have been anything else, because prior to that there just wouldn't have been this cline of human being, this kind of race of these pale-skinned humans. So you have this replacement that takes place across Europe, and that's what this part of the story is talking about. I'm just going to quickly pop into the comments. Hi, RJ Mackenzie, how's it going? Prehistoric North Africans plus ancient Near Eastern, Northeastern farmers, Indo-Europeans, modern Europeans with some other ethnic groups thrown into dependent. So that's actually an important point. I'm going to put that on the screen. The reason this is important is because actually, like I mentioned before, or in the video I should say, I did mention the fact that people were either now going to be wholly kind of this new cline, this Caucasian, so to speak, or some kind of hybridization with them. But essentially you're having, what you're looking at, or what you're observing, is a massive spread of these people across the European continent. And as a result, so if you look at North Africa, for instance, you get this massive amounts of hybridization that's taken place. You get the same thing in the kind of like Iberian Peninsula, in the Middle East, in kind of that whole Mediterranean basin. You get these hybridized human beings, and then you get the more, and ironically, there's no such thing as a pure Caucasian. This is we're gonna come into this a little bit later, but there's actually no such thing as a pure Caucasian, because we know that they are a result of interbreeding between Africans and Asians. That's how you get white people. So essentially, there's no such thing. You're never gonna get a pure Caucasian. They are Africans at the end of the day. The whole world is Africans. They all descend from the African continent. That's inescapable. That's proven in their DNA as well. So the African origins of mankind isn't something that's really up for debate anymore. But yet the world's been flipped on its head, where we kind of like look at people through degrees of Caucasianness, so to speak, So we kind of look at a pure Caucasian race, and then we kind of say, well, everyone's got kind of like a declining level of Caucasian admixture right down till you get to the African. And we're going to deal with how that perception has been given to the world, as opposed to when it should be the other way around. Actually, everyone's African, and they've got increasing amounts of mutation away from the African genome. It's a very different perspective, or very different way to look at things. But anyway, I'm going to play on.
This went on for some time. Years became decades, and decades became centuries. Over time, it began to be the general belief that all domestic breeds in Europe had always been of Bengal stock. The knowledge of their Asian origin was now unknown to the general public and snubbed by historians.
Okay, so this is obvious, but very important to touch on. Okay, this is talking about presentism. Okay, the forgetting of where everyone's come from. So because now people look around themselves and they see, okay, well, actually, all the Scottish people are this colour, all of the English people are this colour, all of the Spanish people are this colour, all of these people are that colour. Because everyone looks a certain way. Something's disconnected. I hope that's not going to throw off my broadcast. Am I still connected? I'm still live. Okay, cool. Sorry. My PC just did one of those weird USB things where it looked like something disconnected itself. Sorry. So because people have this presentist perspective, what happens is they quickly, or at least because they're not educated about it, they don't know about their origins. So as a result, first of all, Europeans start coming up with fanciful tales about their origin story when their origin story is known, and it's kind of like, it's, you don't have to dig too far to get that. But then also you get the complete kind of removal or erasure, and erasure can happen through two things. It can happen through the whitewashing and the deliberate erasure, but it can also, and this is actually much more effective, and this is what's happened in the African community, so I'm going to share this with everyone. The most effective form of erasure is just to stop acknowledging something, just to stop speaking about it, to stop sharing it. And I've spoken previously about the importance of actually acknowledging and listening to your elders. So when people say to you, Jim, your grandmother was part Cherokee, and then you listen, yeah, he's chatting sense. When your granddad says to you, if you're, maybe you're Bayesian, your granddad says to you, our ancestors come from Ireland, you listen to them because they're chatting some truth. When they say, the Yoruba, we migrated from, Sudan or whatever, you listen to your ancestors, because actually one of the most detrimental things you can do for our progress and for your own future is to disregard your elders, because that's how you create this erasure. That's when people, so they can erase things physically, which we'll come to talk about a little bit later, but also that erasure that just comes from not acknowledging that something's happened in the past is really, really striking. So you have to make sure that you stay on top of that and you respect the oral history, because actually for a large part, many Africans and actually many black people in general, the oral history might be all you have. There might be an aversion or some kind of, obstacle in the way for us recording that history. There might be a reason it's not being recorded. So do your best. I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I was speaking to a Nubian friend of mine the other day, and she was talking about the fact that the Nubian language is dying out. And I said, there's no way it's going to die out, because A, we're not going to let it die out. And B, it's important that we re-galvanize people to speak the language and make sure that they place it in really high regard, because that ball's in our court. We have to do that. That's our personal responsibility to make sure that these things are carried forward. So I'm just sorry, I know I went off a bit of a rant, but it's really, really important that we share things and we acknowledge and we talk about our history, because not talking about it is another way that you can kind of kill your history. So listen to your ancestors, listen to your parents, listen to your grandparents, get as many tales from them as you can. And maybe you're the one who's been called to do the job of recording that, but it's really important that you do that. Okay. Yes. And sorry, Akesh just said something along the lines of, in the Discord, let's grab our oral traditions. I think that's a fantastic idea. So yeah, let's do that. Yes, so I like that. I'm just going to put this comment on the screen because I like that one. All right, so let's carry on with the story anyway.
Common domestic cats like tabbies and even the elegant Egyptian Mao were now regarded as ugly, clumsy, and to some, even dumb. In contrast...
Okay, so I'm going to be pausing a lot from now. So now we have the previously upheld and dignified indigenous being regarded or being lowered in order to elevate the Bengal. Okay, so you can see what the analogy is here. So you've got the preeminence of the Bengal taking place in Europe. And because now Europeans are viewing themselves as being this superior race, it comes with the denigration of the other races. So there's a really close tie to this part of history to the whitewashing. So this is when it kind of comes into the fact that actually you don't need to dig too far back into European, British and Scottish history in particular. You don't have to dig too far back before you start uncovering essentially the melanated monarchies and the melanated high class and the melanated aristocrats, people who were once held in incredibly high regard. I was having a discussion the other day, I think it was on my forum, but we were talking about the fact that in England, for instance, this is just an example, by the way, this isn't the only one, because this is something that this video is analogous for the entirety of basically Europe and Asia, to be honest with you. But I'm just going to give you a specific example. In England, for instance, they used to call dark-skinned black people blue man. So they used to call them blue people or blue men. Essentially, that is the darkest form of black. When you're so black, essentially the skin is perceptually blue. It looks blue. And I raised the example, and this is something that another scholar had told me a few years back, that is where the saying of blue blood came from. You have to be of blue blood to ascend the throne. So it's talking about being of the first men. So if you look at the first men, the original men of the British Isles, of Scotland, of Europe, they were the very, very, very darkest people. And in order to ascend the throne, you had to be of that blue blood. You couldn't just essentially skip along from anywhere. You had to prove your ascendancy. And this was done through showing, they used to have portraits with their favorites, what we call quote unquote Negro favorites. But I'm not going to go into all of that now. Once again, that's a deep dive that we'll do in another day. But the point being that now we're beginning to talk about the fact that essentially you have to kind of pull down and denigrate these other races, and to exemplify the beauty of the Bengal, or to exemplify the beauty of the European, these other races have to be seen or perceived as inferior in some way. And it kind of gets into it more and more as we go to.
Contrast, the Bengal was hailed for its beauty, rosettes, and superior intelligence. However, as present became history, historians began to uncover historical artworks, photographs, and even ancient pet cemeteries across Europe, which made it abundantly clear that Bengals were not the preferred species of the continent historically.
So this one here, obviously, once again, very clear analogy that's being made here, and I'm talking very, very bluntly about once again, you do a bit of archaeology and a bit of digging, you're going to find nothing but black monarchs. You're going to find nothing but people of color. And that's, once again, throughout Europe and Asia. So everyone's seen pretty much everything. You've all seen the statues of old Buddha. You've all seen or at least I perceive you've seen like I said, the image of Cheddar Man. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the ivory bangle lady as well. She was one of the first Romans to settle in York. All of these kind of very important aristocratic milestones in European history are all coming back, and will all come back as black. And I know people, oh, you're blackwashing history. I'm absolutely not. I've actually got a short, if you go through my shorts, one of my earliest shorts, that uncovers the whitewashing of European paintings. And it would shock some of you to know that as recently as Queen Elizabeth I, we have whitewashing taking place. And this is a video that I've been planning to do for a very, very, very long time, that uncovers the fact that actually there's a painting of Queen Elizabeth I that's been painted over to make it white, when the original was a swarthy or a black or dark-skinned person, which I found incredibly shocking, because Queen Elizabeth I isn't one of my favourite historical characters. So I'm not going to go into all of that. The point being that you don't have to dig too far, but the more you dig, the more melanated history becomes, particularly on this continent. So this is one of the problems that was faced by the Europeans when they're kind of like dealing with their own history. Actually, I'll give you a really quick analogy. Well, a really quick story, actually. If you go back into kind of anthropological history, go back about 80 years. No, say about 100 years, actually. Yeah, because it'll be the 1920s, yeah. If you go back about 100 years, you'll come across loads of studies that talk about the superiority of the dolichocephalic people on the, dolichocephalic Europeans. and they talk about the fact that the dolichocephalic skull, and that basically means your skull is longer than it, it's a long skull. It's not round, or it's not rounded, it's not square. It's a long skull. And they talk about the superiority of the dolichocephalic skull. So all of these kind of, anthropologists and historians, they're all on this kind of like bandwagon of championing dolichocephalic skulls. And do you know why they were on that bandwagon of championing dolichocephalic skulls? The reason is because they were digging up all of the European monarchies, and all of the European monarchs had dolichocephaly. All of them, almost without exception. And they had Habsburg jaw as well. And we're not going to talk about that because you guys all know what that is. I've spoken about that previously. So they're digging up all of these early Europeans who are of obviously, of influence, and they're all coming up with dolichocephalic. So they instantly think, well, all of our ancestors were dolichocephalic. This is the superior European race. And what's funny is over the next couple of decades, they started measuring skulls right across the world. And surprise, guess what? No Europeans are coming back dolichocephalic. In fact, dolichocephaly happens to be a skull trait that is almost entirely restricted to the African continent. In fact, there's only really two groups of people that have it, and they're both black. That's the Melanesians, who are black, like your Papua New Guineans. They are maybe geographically separated, but they are phenotypically and physically, black people. And then you have your Africans who have it, almost endemically within the African nation. And they're not exclusively. Africans have all of the skull shapes, but they have a very large amount of dolichocephalics, particularly along the Nile Valley, East Africa, loads of them in West Africa as well, Central Africa. They're everywhere, but they're not to be found in Europe. So all of a sudden, that area of inquiry goes dead silent. And they stop using those kinds of craniometrics because they realized actually the old Europeans, and when we're saying old, we're talking about maybe going back 100, because they don't know their own history. Not everyone's kind of in on this this big cover-up that's taking place because they don't know their own history. They're just honestly thinking they're digging up their great European ancestors. They're looking at the paintings and they're going, oh, look, there's our ancestors. There's King Henry VIII, he's going to, be one of our great ancestors, and they dig him up. And I'm not saying King Henry VIII, by the way, had a dolichocephalic skull. I'm not sure, but I'm just using this as an example. They dig him up and they realize he's dolichocephalic. So they go, yes, this is the greatest skull shape that makes us superior. And then they actually do measurements of modern populations, and they don't have it. In fact, it's so much so to the extent that dolichocephaly now is considered a disability amongst the Europeans. So Europeans actually classify, and you can Google it, dolichocephaly. If you type it into Google, it will actually come back and say this is a disability. That's what they regard it as now. And you have to kind of dig to find out that it's actually something that is very normal amongst the Africans. And by the way, if you haven't, and this is a plug and it isn't a plug, but since you're all here, I'm going to give you this plug anyway. I've started another channel, which I'm going to leave a link to actually, where I cover these kind of like more in-depth subjects. So I'm just going to quickly pull it up on the screen. Here it is. And the reason I'm bringing this up now actually is because I'm talking about this very subject. So this says, are Africa's long arm spans are a disability? Oh, that's great. I've used really bad grammar. No wonder I'm not getting any views. Anyway, yeah. Are Africa's long arm spans a disability? I need to really change that. And this is my new channel, The King Mono Show. And this video here, which I'm not going to play now, but I will leave a link in there so you guys can actually subscribe and watch this in your own time. So please do that if you do get an opportunity. I'm putting a link in now. But this video deals with the fact that every time Europeans come across a trait that is not common within their populations, they will always classify it as a disability. So they come across people, Africans, who have long arms. I tackle this in this video, like this African man here, and a short torso. And they say, oh, well, he might have Marfan syndrome. not knowing that blooming half of the African population have this exact build. And actually, guess who had this exact build as well? You guessed it right. The ancient Egyptians had this exact build. They had this exact stature, which is short torso, long arms, longer tibia bones. I'm not going to go into those full details now because this video covers it very well. So if you want to know more about that subject, please do subscribe to the King Mono Show, where I kind of dive into these more detailed aspects of anthropometry and anthropology in a kind of interesting way. So please feel free to subscribe to that channel. Okay, and I'm going to type in the spelling of dolichocephaly because someone's asked me to type that in as well. Dolichocephaly. Okay, so yeah, so that's what I was talking about. So the point being, because they don't know their history, and it's not their own fault, because obviously this world is, you know, consistently being, you know, manipulated by people in power. But the bottom line is, because these people who are innocently, I say innocently in inverted commas, kind of researching their history in belief that what they're being told is true, they can make these massive and huge errors. These are massive errors that they're making here, you know, to actually make all these books trumpeting dolichocephaly when they can't even access that. And obviously it proves the point I was saying earlier, that these people that came before them were not the same. So it's very interesting. But anyway, that was a huge digression. Let's go.
In fact, beyond a certain point in history, it became apparent that there was no trace of Bengals even existing. But this couldn't be correct, could it? Well, in a world heavily biased and invested in the preeminence of this particular breed, this was a truth too hard to swallow. This uncomfortable truth upset Bengal owners who took pride in their beautiful and dominant breed of cat, whose long necks, slender bodies and rosettes were now seen as the epitome of feline beauty.
Okay, so this is another important point. So obviously I've touched on the fact that people, European people, then because of the situation they're in and because of presentism, will then view their race as the epitome of beauty, and they obviously will not like the fact that when they do a bit of digging, they are not finding what they're expecting to find. They are finding people who weren't them, but according to their history, we created everything. We are the geniuses. We are the fathers of civilization. We are the civilizers of, you know, the brutish and barbaric caveman. We've done everything, when the reality is that, you know, before the modern European even existed, a lot of these societies and civilizations were either flourishing or in the process of beginning to flourish. So it creates a huge dichotomy for them to deal with. Now, where it's come onto now is dealing with the fact that of features. So this is really important, because the difference between these different clines of humanity, races, is essentially features. And this obviously harks back to the stupidity of racism, which I'm not going to go into too much right now. But racism is so stupid because basically all this differentiation, most of it is being based on appearance. Okay, so if someone's born with a certain level of melanation in their skin and a certain kinkiness to their hair, you know, they're classified as one race or the other, you know. And what happened is the European quickly found out that phenotypically, if you look at the European, unlike the African, phenotypically they are very narrow, they're very restricted, in that there's not much variance to the modern European. And that's not any way disrespectful. It's just kind of like they all have essentially the same complexion. It doesn't change that much between the shades of, you know, very porcelain to kind of like slightly deeper pink. It's not a massive amount in between. So you essentially have almost one or, you know, couple of complexions. So what happens is those complexion, or that level of melanation or lack of melanation, becomes the standard. You then also have the physical features, such as maybe they all have slender noses. They don't have the spectrum of features you have in the African continent, where you can have a really slender nose and you can have a really broad nose. They just have slender noses. So then narrow noses then become the depiction of beauty, once again, we can look at the lips. They only have thin lips. They don't have, once again, the variance or the spectrum of lip sizes you get in Africa, where you can have really massive lips or you can have really narrow lips. We have the full spectrum, and sometimes often you can get that in the same family. My oldest brother has incredibly narrow lips. They're almost non-existent. I've got very full lips, always been told, very kissable lips. Sorry, that's what I've been told, but I've got very full lips. My oldest brother has got almost non-existent lips. His lips are so narrow. He's got a very kind of like Tootsie phenotype. If you saw him, you'd think he was Tootsie. He's very tall as well. I'm very envious of his height. But the point being that we're coming out of the same family. I've got an older brother who's got no lips, and I've got quite thick lips, particularly in comparison to my brother. So this is something that's normal for us. We have this phenotypic variance, but obviously Europeans don't have that. They all have very narrow lips. So then once again, narrow lips become the standard, and so on and so on. Eye colors, once again. Okay, so eye color, actually, this is one area they probably have slightly more diversity than us, because they do tend to jump around blue, green, brown, sometimes black. So actually, they do have a lot of diversity when it comes to eye color. So once again, this is something that kind of becomes standardized, and hair color and so on. So the point being that if you look at the European, what happens is over time, and what happens even within their books, their sciences, their history, everything around their kind of educational system is built around making their format the norm, and their format also becomes the standard of beauty, and they start to take ownership of features that they've inherited. So that's really the important point that I'm making. They're taking ownership of features that they've inherited. They've inherited their narrow noses, but you'll see they use academia to then take ownership of those features. So where those features occur elsewhere, it's viewed as a European feature, as opposed to credit being given to the group that they inherited it from. Okay, so that's kind of the point that was being made here, but we'll touch on this later. This is going to be a recurring theme. Let's carry on.
Even though they inherited those long necks and slender bodies from older domestic cat species such as the Egyptian Mau, who were largely preferred as breeding mates with the leopard cats in the early days of establishing the pedigree. Not only that, their attractive rosettes...
So I'm just going to touch on that really quickly. So this is, just to be clear, actually, this is a really nice coincidence. So the Egyptian Mau actually so this is not a true story, but actually has elements of kind of like truth in terms of how Bengals have been created. And Bengals were actually a result of breeding between domestic cats and leopard cats. And actually the Egyptian Mau was a preferential breed. In fact, one of my cats, Cleo, looks exactly like an Egyptian Mau. She's a cross Bengal, and she just looks like a Bengal bot with an Egyptian Mau stature, and she's got kind of Egyptian Mau patterning. So she looks really close to being an Egyptian Mau, one of my cats. And the reason I paused it there actually is because modern European shows a lot of phenotypic inheritance. That's the word I'm looking for. Shows a lot of phenotypic inheritance from certain East Africans. Okay, so it's actually quite nice that in this story it said the Egyptian Mau, because Egypt is obviously in East Africa. So that was a coincidence, but it was a nice coincidence in terms of the telling of this tale, because what's happened now is that the Bengal cat, because it's now the dominant force in Europe, just like the European now the dominant force in Europe, all of those features that we look at and we see in East Africa, and we see amongst, obviously we see it in West Africa as well, but let's, for the sake of this story, really focus on the fact that we see these at a high rate, much higher rate in East Africa. We see these narrow, slender noses. We see straight hair, for instance. So we see straight and wavy hair. We see narrow noses. All of these features that they've inherited directly from East Africa, the table now gets flipped on its head, and actually now these are seen as European features. So now when we look at an East African, and in East Africa we're looking at the oldest forms of human there is. Yeah, when we look at East African, we go, oh, it must be European admixture that's made them straight haired. It must be European admixture that's given them a narrow nose. It must be European admixture that's given them these features. And we never look at it at the perspective of, well, maybe the European inherited those features from this part of Africa. And that's the important perspective, or the important difference of perspective that I'm hoping that you get from this. The fact that a lot of the features that you see amongst the Europeans are inherited features they have inherited from Africa, and not vice versa. But this obviously takes a complete paradigm shift for us to be able to understand that perspective. It's quite a different perspective to the one that we've been taught, but nonetheless I do believe it's correct. So that was just quite a nice little coincidence there. Let me let it play.
Which they obviously gained from their leopard cat ancestors were also now adored and admired in isolation, regarded as an independent, spontaneous evolutionary leap, developed in isolation of other breeds. These borrowed traits were now being assigned to and owned by the Bengal. Scientists decided, due to the broadness of these traits, to coin a new term, Bengaloid, as a way to simply communicate when any of these traits were seen in what was pre-Bengal society.
Okay, so this is where we really get to the the real meat, and to the real meat of what's being discussed here. So first of all, does anyone know what the term Bengaloid is analogous to? This should be really, really easy question for everyone to answer. So I want you to put in the comments really quickly, what do you think the term Bengaloid is analogous to? Just chuck it in the comments, and as soon as I see it, I'll carry on. I'll wait. I know there's a bit of a delay. Yes, the Black Sea, got it straight away. So yes, it's the Caucasoid. Now, Caucasoid is one of those terms that I hate. It has absolutely no anthropological basis. It's entirely meaningless. And it's really important that people understand what a Caucasoid is, because a Caucasoid is nothing and a Caucasoid is everything. And that's exactly what it's designed to be. Essentially, it's a way so looking at this story, the Bengals want to claim ownership, or at least the Bengal owners, I should say, want to claim ownership over achievement. So this is where it really does get into the meat and bones of Egyptology and, world history and things that we've discussed quite regularly on this channel. They want to claim ownership of things that they have absolutely nothing to do with, no relation to. So they need a terminology, a bucket terminology, that allows them to insert themselves where they do not exist. And that term in real history, or at least in our current anthropological state, is Caucasoid. It allows them to insert themselves where they have no business being. So all a scientist needs to see, or an Egyptologist needs to see, is the existence of a narrow nose, and they say, Caucasoid. It doesn't matter if that narrow nose predates them. It doesn't matter if that narrow nose has got nothing to do with European interaction. They'll simply classify it as being Caucasoid. Okay, it's the same thing if they see straight hair. They go, Caucasoid features. Once again, they'll throw all other aspects of science out of the window. This happens in Egyptology quite a lot. They could be looking at the body of a mummy that has super tropical African limb proportions, that has, the body plan of someone who clearly evolved in Africa. But they only have to see one feature that fits within that Caucasoid box, i.e. one feature that they share with whatever they're looking at, and instantly they've claimed it as, Caucasoid, that belongs to us because it has our features. Now I'm actually going to do another live stream really soon, which talks about basically, it's called the phenotypic matrix. And I'm going to kind of take you through it. But I'm going to give you an example of that now, because I want to really illustrate this point. I know everyone probably gets it, but I think illustrating this point is actually quite important. So I'm going to just illustrate this point really quickly, because I'm trying to think if I've got it open. Do I have the window open? Actually, if I don't have it open, maybe I won't. I don't have it open. Okay, no, sorry, I built that up. I don't have it open. I literally couldn't bother to try and type it in and find it, because I've got a diagram, but finding that diagram now is going to be a little bit long. So I'm not going to do it. But the point I was going to make is essentially you have, in fact, I'm going to play this quickly. I'm going to make the point after I play it, because it's quite important.
This connected the relatively new breed of cat to a world that predated its existence and thus dealt with the troublesome problem of anthropology. As such, any occurrence of physical attributes like rosettes, slender bodies, or even intelligent behavior exhibited in cats anywhere were now to be regarded as Bengaloid features.
So you see that there? Intelligent behavior. We've seen that, haven't we, in our history? So we've seen them say, oh, well, this is a civilization that we see here, and these people have the ability to read and write. Oh, that's a Caucasoid feature. So it doesn't even have to be something that's physically tangible. They'll literally claim or make a claim on anything that kind of like is attractive, or anything they can relate to themselves. So it's not just literally the physical features. It could even just be, like I said, behaviors, and they must find a way of inserting, this Caucasoid terminology in. And it's quite interesting, because I was on the page of a Eurocentrist, and I'm not going to mention who they are, but I've got a few Eurocentrists who are quite obsessed with making videos about me. But I was on a page of one of these Eurocentrists, and in their latest video they said, not every Caucasoid is white, but all whites are Caucasoid. And I was just like, you're going to openly admit that. So you're openly admitting that you've got a term, Caucasoid, that ultimately is meaningless, because you're sitting there as a Eurocentrist trying to claim everyone's history. But not all Caucasoids are white. So in other words, if Caucasoids are not white, then what are they? Why are we calling them Caucasoid? Because surely you're calling them Caucasoid to relate to Caucasian, and Caucasian is another way of essentially saying white. But if you're saying Caucasoids are not white, you're basically saying, well, we're just going to claim this because it has a similarity to us, but it actually doesn't have any relation to us. Do you understand the ludicrous and the stupidity of this term, Caucasoid? It's absolutely pseudo. It doesn't have any place in discourse. But anyway, let me carry on, because I want to get to the second term.
At the other end of the spectrum, domestic cats bore the brunt of the Bengal owners' historical delusions. They were largely classified as Felioid as opposed to Bengaloid, and these two meaningless terms dominated anthropological discourse.
Okay, so that's the other term I wanted to get to. So we've got two terms, Caucasoid and Felioid, okay, that dominate historical discord. Can someone tell me what these two terms, Bengaloid and Felioid, I've already given one away, but you knew already, what these two terms, Bengaloid and Felioid, are comparative to, and they dominate historical discourse. Go ahead, put it in the chat. And whilst you're doing that, I'm going to find this matrix actually that I mentioned earlier. Let's see if it's come through yet. No one's got it yet. Bengaloid and Felioid, what are they analogous to? No one's got it yet. Is my stream working? Has it all died? Is it on there? It says I'm still alive. I'm still alive. I can't believe no one's got that. So the question was, someone said I missed the question. The question was, Bengaloid and Filioid, what are those two terms related to? There we go. So Nerd Large got it again. Nerd Large just seems to be the very, very quick off the mark there. Okay, so yes, the answer is Filioid is Negroid. Now, why is this important? Why is this important? Okay, I'm gonna share a diagram with you guys. So just bear with me. I'm gonna share a diagram with you. And this is the only this program is the only one I could think of to do it in. So I'm going to share a diagram. Okay, so bear with me because this diagram seems a bit crazy, but I want you to kind of just like work with me here because I'm going to explain something really quickly, and I hope that it makes sense after I do this. So this is a phenotypic matrix, and I'm going to draw up a few of these. I just got the idea of doing this as a way of kind of like displaying what takes place in anthropology and why it's important that we kind of identify that. So here's a diagram, and essentially it's a matrix, and a matrix is basically, you know, got two indices. We have cephalic index along the y axis over here, and prognathism, which is the kind of protrusion of your mouth along the x-axis here. So we've got two states here. So we've got prognathism. So prognathism is how much basically your jaw protrudes beyond your nose bridge, essentially. Yeah, so how much the lower part of your jaw protrudes outwards. So I'm just gonna quickly alt drag this, and let's quickly say this end over here is subnasal prognathism. So you know that kind of like look when the bottom half of your mouth pokes out. That is very much an African phenotype. You don't really get it outside of Africa and maybe Oceania kind of area, but it's totally unheard of kind of amongst Europeans. So we've got two matrix here, okay, and then along the cephalic index here we've got dolichocephalic, which is when your skull's really long, and then we've got brachycephalic is when your skull's really square. So is everyone with me there? So we've got the cephalic index along this axis, and then we've got the levels of prognathism along this axis. Now this is just to kind of illustrate how this works in anthropology. So if we look at Europeans, let's look at their range. The range of a modern European is skull-wise, they are mesocephalic, which is kind of like the middle of the cephalic index. They can't access dolichocephaly, okay? So they come up to around here. That's as far as they get. In fact, let me just put a little shape there. Oh, wait, is it here? Yeah. Okay, let's put a little arrow there. Yeah, so they can kind of get up to around here. Yeah, so Europeans can kind of get up to here when it comes to their skull indexes or their cephalic index. That's as far as they can get. And then when it comes to prognathism, they really get up to about the middle. They don't access subnasal prognathism. So what's happened here? Okay, cool. If I just alt drag that, I'm just going to say they come up to around here. And as a result of knowing that, we know that the range for Europeans in this kind of matrix that I've created is here. So this pink bubble that you can see here is giving us the range for what essentially Europeans are capable of. Okay. Now, by comparison, if we look at the modern, you know, melanated continental Africans, okay, if we look at, first of all, the range for skull cephalic indices, you know, how long or square their skull is, we have hyper brachycephalic people in many of the West African clans, but also dolichocephalic as well. And we have hyperdolichocephalic people in the Great Lakes region, for instance, and amongst the Maasai. We have hyperdolichocephalic people, and then we have everything in between. So when it comes to our cephalic indices, you can see that we access the full range because of our phenotypic diversity. We access the full range there. Now, the same can be said for the level of prognathism. Okay, so you can have people who have really strong subnasal prognathism, such as you see amongst the Dinka people of South Sudan. Once again, not all of them, but a lot of them access that really strong subnasal prognathism, the kind of subnasal prognathism you see in the Sphinx. And then at the other end, when you have literally no subnasal prognathism and your chin almost goes inwards, we see that quite commonly as well. So you can see that quite commonly in places like Uganda. You see it amongst the Somali to an extent. I mean, they have a bit of prognathism, but some of them you can see with their kind of sunken in bottom. But the bottom line is, we essentially, you know, if I'm going to be, you know, really kind of politically correct with this, I might say we don't access right at the bottom. Maybe we kind of like end up, let's go grab that quickly. Maybe we just end up over here. So maybe we don't get quite at the bottom. But I've already drawn this, so you just have to deal with me. I hope everyone's still with me, by the way. Now, this diagram now gives you an idea of the kind of capabilities. So if I take, I'm just going to quickly get another shape. Let's just draw like a star. So I'm just going to draw a star in there. Okay, and let's make it yellow. So there we go. So if I grab this star and I place it anywhere, okay, so you can either have someone who has really strong subnasal prognathism and a really square skull, or you can have someone who's got, you know, really dolichocephalic and has no subnasal prognathism. In fact, this area over here is where, to be honest with you, is where a lot of the kind of like Great Lakes region is. So we kind of have mild prognathism, okay, and really dolichocephalic skulls. So you can be anywhere here. Now, this is where I get on to that point that I was making. What the European will do is essentially they'll take this area here that they obviously exhibit, so inhabit, and they're going to call this Caucasoid, okay? So anyone who comes in this area, although they can be, if you end up here, you can quite comfortably be an African. But if they find a skull that is brachycephalic and has, you know, very mild prognathism, they will instantly call it absolutely a European skull because it's Caucasoid as far as they're concerned. They will also take anyone who maybe ends up over here and call them Caucasoid. But here's what's also quite interesting. They don't need both things to be true to label things Caucasoid. So although the modern European is restricted to here, they only need one of these things to be true for them to then take ownership of it. So for instance, let's say they have a skull that is dolichocephalic, you know, which is outside of their range. So it's outside of their range, but it exhibits a lack of prognathism. They will take that lack of prognathism and they'll call that a Caucasoid feature. So even though this sits outside of the range of their accessibility, they will still claim this area. And the same goes likewise. They'll find a skull that's maybe brachycephalic, okay, a square skull, but it exhibits strong subnasal prognathism. Now, you and I know that strong subnasal prognathism invalidates the European from being there. You guys don't have strong subnasal prognathism, but they'll say, nope, it's brachycephalic, so therefore there is Caucasoid hybridization. Do you see how that works? So this Caucasoid thing allows them essentially to claim areas that don't belong to them. And actually, the only time you'll see something being classified as Negroid is when it fulfills all of the conditions that they don't match. So when they find that skull that is actually dolichocephalic and has strong subnasal prognathism, it's kind of got all of the features there. So they almost can't deny it. So I turn around and go, okay, well, this is a true Negroid. And I don't know if you guys have heard that term before, but that's a term that actually is all across old anthropology. You'll see the term true Negroid. So there we have a true Negroid sitting here, okay? because this is an area that they absolutely can't access. But all of these areas which they also can't access, which they're also invalidated from, they'll find a way of roping in this Caucasoid terminology. And this is true right across. Obviously, I've only got 2 on this kind of phenotypic matrix. I've only got 2. I've got loads of these, by the way. I'm going to do about maybe 10 of these. And this is true across all of them. Okay, so, you could be looking at limb proportions. You could be looking at, skin color. All of these things here. As the African, Africans have huge diversity. So really, as an African, you could plot anywhere. Like I said earlier, my brother's got no lips and no prognathism. Okay, and he's really dolichocephalic. So actually, here's my brother sitting here. I told you he looks tootsie. So here's my oldest brother. He's probably sits around here because he's quite strongly dolichocephalic. He's got no lips. Okay, if they found his skull, do you think they'd be calling him black? Do you think they'd be calling him a negroid? He's as negroid as I am. But they wouldn't be using that term. They'd be calling him Caucasoid. Or they'd say he's definitely some kind of hybridized. He has, Caucasoid features, these. And this is what they do with history. So it's really important kind of you understand how these catch-all terminologies are used to claim aspects of history that doesn't belong. All right, I've rambled on. All right, I'm going to close that down now. But I hope that little diagram was useful. Could have just been a waste of time. But anyway, let's carry on.
Thus, short limbs, plain bodies, or, God forbid, stripes, basically anything uncommon in Bengal cats, were now considered felioid, which, broadly speaking, was seen as ugly or vulgar to the Bengaloid-leaning European public. The previously popular tabby was aggressively singled out for scorn, being regarded as particularly ugly. Ironically, it had once been regarded as the darling of Europe. Photo.
So, I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but the tabby cat, surprisingly enough, is actually an analogy for the black European. Okay, so that's one that probably would have gone over most people's heads. But yes, the tabby cat is actually an analogy for the native or the indigenous black European who didn't suddenly disappear. Okay, Cheddar Man and his people didn't die out. Okay, there would have been a process of these people, and there's lots of recorded history of blackamoors and Negroes being exported to the Americas, being exported to the Caribbeans. There's lots of documents of, we have the Crusades, which were essentially an extermination of all of the people, the Moors, the dark-skinned, the black people of Europe, mainland Europe. They were wiped out in a series of crusades, etc., etc. So we have lots of recorded history that tells us what happened to these indigenous peoples. So the tabby cat actually is the analogy for that aspect or that part of history.
Literature and cemeteries were filled with the remnants of the tabby cat. Artworks were rife with tabby paintings and iconography, and literature spoke of the beauty of tabby cats and their
yes, and someone's put their Kapruki, obviously. My guy's well tapped. Was put in Moorish iconography. Absolutely, you can see it all over. If I had my camera on, and I'm not turning it on because I'm looking pretty rough today, but if I had my camera on, I would show you several books that I have which show you the various coats of arms that exist throughout England and Scotland that depict the very black Moorish families that lots of modern wealthy English and Scottish families now descend from as a result of, could have been interbreeding or could have just been direct replacement and usurpation, but these families had very, very much black origins and they have names to match that as well. So it's quite interesting.
Prowess for mousing and domestication across the continent. However, not satisfied with the already dominant position of the Bengal breed, the Bengal owners worried immensely about a renaissance of tabby keeping in Europe, so they decided to ensure that the tabby was replaced and removed from history completely.
So this now is going to go into and start talking about the whitewashing of history. And this is definitely, now I'm going to give you what is, in my opinion, my first conspiracy theory today, because I like to think most of the stuff we've spoken about is pretty factual, but I'm going to give you my first conspiracy theory here, and that is the reasoning for the whitewashing of history. And my belief is just essentially it was it was imperative to remove the remnants of that aspect of history. Otherwise, history will just repeat itself. So, for instance, if people exist in a society where they know the natural order was for a certain type of people to rule, they only have to be removed for it for a small amount of time before they'll start defaulting back to that position. So the only way these new ruling families could essentially take up proper leadership in Europe is they had to erase the old images. So actually the erasure and the whitewashing of history is not just some kind of like, obsession of historians. It's got nothing to do with that. It's actually something that's very essential for the upkeep of the monarchs that are now in control and the current society. The only way it was going to work is if those old images didn't exist. Otherwise, people would essentially default and demand to be back into that default position. Imagine if we lived in a world where they were honest about history, and you're walking into museums and you're seeing the black monarchs who used to rule Europe. You're not going to have any respect for the current monarchs, particularly in a racist society. There's going to always be that thing niggling in the back of your mind where you're thinking, no, it's probably better that we put them back on the throne. Anything's better than you guys, kind of thing. So it is actually imperative for the new ruling class, when the modern European took over leadership of the European continent, they were almost forced to. They had to erase the past of the indigenous leadership and the indigenous rulership. It was a natural hand-in-hand thing that had to take place, because it wouldn't have been maintained the other way. And I think actually that reasoning is actually a lot of the motive for where we find ourselves right now in society, modern, why racism was invented. It was almost imperative. Otherwise, there would have been no maintenance of the new leadership or the new rulership and the new monarchs that were taking leadership. So it's almost imperative. So that kind of makes sense in my mind. But that is my Nature Knows No Color Lines big book, so that is kind of my little conspiracy theory that I'm throwing out there, because I don't have enough data to say that's absolutely the reason, but at least in my mind it kind of makes sense. But I told you I'm going a little conspiracy one there. Let me keep it playing.
Paintings depicting this once loved cat species were retouched, with stripes being replaced by rosettes. Cat bones exhibiting tabby traits were classified as Bengaloid as soon as any sign of slimness was exhibited, and the ones that were unpassable were either destroyed, classified as a visiting migrant breed, or absorbed some other way to fit into the revisionist Bengal ideological history.
So you saw there, that was just the idea behind that. There was just the introduction of scientific racism. So this is something that was new. So we're thinking about people like Samuel Morton now, who then took it one step further and decided they had to create a science around this kind of new system. And then once again, this would have been imperative for the maintenance of this kind of new leadership structure. And lots of people were commissioned to create science. Obviously, we have, the very famous Charles Darwin, but also you have people like Samuel Morton as well, and they were instrumental in people basically accepting this new structure of society and thinking, and this was a way of kind of like painting that image to make people believe that this is the way it had always been. So it's kind of like this is how it works, this scientific racism that existed. Okay.
More insidiously, since the tabby was being effectively erased from the continent, the Bengal owners set about installing an atmosphere of negative propaganda against the tabby cat. Academicians of all walks were sponsored to legitimize and even invent scientific reasoning to support its unsuitable nature for domestication. It was now seen as an entirely foreign species, portrayed in the media as a slow, lumbering, dull cat with an aptitude for uncouth behavior, and history was changed to declare it was only ever imported into Europe on a small scale as a cheap alternative to farmers for ratting.
So I'm hoping that you guys here can see the analogy here. Think about the way, what the perception of melanated people is on the European continent. They're not only seen as totally alien and totally separated, even though we are only a few centuries separated from a time when they were literally everywhere all over Europe. But they're also seen as slow. They're seen as, less capable. They're seen as less able. They're seen as lumbering. There's all these attachments that have to be made. Now, obviously, there's the kind of backdrop of slavery, but I like to think that the slavery backdrop was actually just another tool in what was a larger process that was taking place. Like I said, this kind of larger process of replacement of an old form into a new form, so to speak, an old paradigm, an old way of thinking into a new way of thinking. So yes, R.J. Mackenzie says an analogy to African stereotypes is obviously one that's seen. So yeah, you kind of see that there doesn't need too much explanation.
Tabbies were soon targeted, rounded up and shipped abroad. The ones that remained were given to farmers or used for hunting games. They were placed in storage facilities and over time began to lose the very domesticated nature they were once loved for. Becoming more and more wild, they eventually adopted more of their instinctual wild traits. Some would call it an evolutionary survival adaptation.
So I did touch on this point as well, the fact that when a certain group is treated in a certain way, it will start to take on those traits. And this is something that you have to be really mindful of, because this is something that I've actually observed happening, particularly in the UK, where the media is weaponized, and I'm sure it's seen in America as well, where the media is weaponized to really communicate this image that people of a certain race essentially can only be capable of doing certain things. And you get this constant reinforcement, this constant negative reinforcement. And what happens is, unless the youth and unless people kind of like within those cultures are educated within those cultures by parents, by elders, about their true history and about their true capability, they will limit themselves to the standards that have been set out in the media and by society, because everyone, you have to remember, when it comes to the media, this is not just a self-image, because a lot of people take that perception, well, it's just your self-image. No, you see yourself better, but it's not just a self-image, it's also the image that the rest of the world is absorbing. So whenever they go out to any kind of place, marketplace, school, educational facility, anywhere they go, workplace, they're going to be treated in the way that people perceive that group, and people are going to treat them that way subconsciously regardless. So there's a lot of kind of strength and resistance that people who are members of that group have to take in. Otherwise, they will start to take on those traits that are being essentially projected upon them from the outside. So it's really important that you're aware of that, because you will take on the traits that are presented, or at least the expectations that are placed upon you, unless you are always mentally aware that they exist and you actually have some kind of self-talk that takes place and replaces that image that is being placed upon you.
The cruel reality of their present status was then back applied to their history, and soon their many years as the beloved favourites of Europe was discarded and replaced by the global belief that they were a breed that was bred for slaughter.
Now, I use the word favourites there deliberately as well. So you heard that word, favourites of Europe. Actually, that's a key word, because quote unquote Negro favourites is something that was used to be common in Europe towards the kind of like late medieval period, where, well, I see classical period, I should say, where when monarchs would paint themselves with a black person as a kind of like claim, in my view, as a claim to the throne, so to speak, as kind of, it shows the blue blood links that took place. They used to call them Negro favorites, but I actually think it's deeper than that. I think it was a way of showing that they had some kind of access to the throne through some kind of relation, and that was what was being depicted in the paintings. So it's quite interesting, but it's worth looking into. But yeah, that's the yeah, I'm gonna keep playing.
And they were suitable for nothing more. The turn of the new century saw the advent of DNA testing, and Bengal owners, who were by now none the wiser about the true history of cats, were excited about the prospect of testing their cats' DNA to find its origins and common ancestors. Leopard cats being wild.
Now, before it dives into the DNA part, I have to make clear my position, because I think I've said this a lot. I'm very, very skeptical, and I'm going to continue to repeat the fact that I'm very, very skeptical about the use and application of DNA. And there's many reasons why. I'm going to do a longer video, and I'll be promising that for a long time, about why I'm very skeptical. But just to give you some of the headlines as to why I'm very skeptical about the use of DNA in anthropology. First of all, DNA is only useful when you have an equal amount of samples across the spectrum of which you're making your analysis based on. And at the moment, DNA sampling is highly favored towards Europeans. I think Europeans make up over 80% of the total global amount of DNA tests that have taken place. So that's a huge reason why Europeans are being given, a lot of markers are being assigned as European markers, which don't belong to Europeans. The second reason is DNA is all about interpretation. And essentially, if you talk to any geneticist, they will actually tell you that human beings have far more overlap than is being presented in these kind of like in these DNA studies. And actually, they only select certain markers that present a pattern that has a favorable story, and they ignore certain markers where either A, they can't tell a story with them, or B, the story that those markers tell are unfavorable. So they'll just kind of ignore them, pretend that they don't exist. So this is all to do with data manipulation, how data is being manipulated in terms of DNA. You can get DNA to tell any story you want. And just to kind of give a really quick example of that, in fact, I'm going to give you a pictorial example. So, you know, I like these, but I'm going to give you a quick pictorial example of what I mean. So this is a part of the kind of longer stream that I'm going to take you through, but I'm going to give you a quick pictorial example of what I mean. So let's take, yeah, here we go. Let's take this guy. So let's take this guy over here. This is my guy. Let's call him Bob. Okay. For want of a better word. This is Bob over here. And Bob has, over his course of his life, he has 3 partners. Okay. He has one partner in England. So you can see him up here with his one partner in England. He has one partner in India. So you can see him over here with his one partner in India. And he has one partner here in Niger. Yeah, he has one partner here in Niger. So you can see him here in Niger. Now, Bob is Nigerian, and this is why he has 3 partners in 3 different countries. Sorry, I had to throw that one in. Laughing to myself there. Nigerians will get it. All right, so anyway, so he's got his 3 partners here in 3 different countries. Okay. Now, Bob, let's say the marker or the mutation ZZ1 occurs in Bob over here. So Bob is the origin of the marker or the mutation ZZ1. Okay. He has a child or son with the white wife in the UK. He has a son with the Asian wife in India, and he has a son with his African wife in Niger. Okay. And you can see he's got 3 different colored sons, but they're all mixed race. Now, those sons living in the nations that they live in all take partners within those nations, okay? And then they have their own offspring over here. So 2 generations down the line, and we have, 3 pretty much white people with this marker, 3 pretty much Asians with this marker, and 3 pretty much, 3, absolutely black people with this marker here in Niger. So we've got 3 different nations, 3 different races, all carrying the same marker. Now, first of all, this is not a rarity for something like this to happen. Okay, migration takes place a lot and has always done in the modern and the ancient world. You might not get this, massive geographic spread, but this is something that's perfectly normal that could take place. Now, here's where I'm going to throw out some questions for you guys. The first question is the ZZ1 marker a Niger marker? Is it a Indian marker, or I should say, is it a Nigerian marker? Is it an Indian marker? Is it a UK marker, or is it a Nigerian marker? Which one is it? Which one does it belong to? It's a rhetorical question because you guys know it's almost impossible to answer that question. It could be either or. Now let's take this one step further, okay? Let's imagine that down the line, there's a lot of offspring that results. So he has a lot of, his offspring have a lot of like multiplication. His sons have a lot of sons, and they have a lot of sons in the Niger region, and they do the same in the UK, and they do the same in India. So we're talking, maybe let's talk 7 generations down the line. So 7 generations down the line, we're looking at hundreds of offspring that are carrying, nearly thousands. I'd say thousands of offspring now that are carrying the ZZ1 marker, because we're talking 7 generations down the line. And they're all the ones in the UK are effectively white. All the ones in Niger are effectively black, and all the ones in India are effectively Asian. Now, let's say within the population of India, this marker is going to be relatively invisible because we're talking about a population of 3 billion people. Was it? No, 1.8 billion people. 1.8 billion people or something like that in India. Okay, so even though there's thousands of people there, it's not really showing that much. But in Niger, they have a slightly smaller population, or much smaller population. So actually this marker is somewhat present. But within the UK, let's say all of his family is restricted to a specific town, okay? And that town is, let's say, Scunthorpe or something like that. So as a result of his family staying in Scunthorpe, we now have half of the city of Scunthorpe carrying the ZZ1 marker. So you with me? So now Scunthorpe has 50% coverage of the ZZ1 marker. There's some obscure town in India that has 1,000 of these people, but they're probably never going to get tested because they don't have the means to get there. And there's quite a few people in this kind of like West Central African nation of Niger who are carrying this marker as well, but they're amongst people who are very genetically diverse. What do you think that marker is going to end up being called? I think we know the answer. So the answer is it's going to end up being called the Scunthorpe marker. They're going to see that, 50% of people in Scunthorpe have it. We found the Scunthorpe marker. And as a result of finding the Scunthorpe marker at 50% in Scunthorpe, they're going to say, 50% of Scunthorpians, I don't know if that's what you call them. Anyway, 50% of Scunthorpians carry the ZZ1 marker, so it must have originated there. And let's say the descendants in Niger do some pretty cool things, and the descendants in India do some pretty cool things. Couple thousand years down the line, they see the ZZ1 marker pop up in India. What do you think their conclusion is going to be? They're like, okay, well, the ZZ1 marker people, they built the You know, we found people who, you know, built the Taj Mahal. They're all carrying the ZZ1 marker. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go, oh, people in Scunthorpe must have migrated to, you know, 1,000 years ago. The people of Scunthorpe must have migrated to India and civilized these poor bastards and help them to understand the, you know, Western technology. And it was by that means that they built the Taj Mahal. And this can be proven by the existence of the ZZ1 marker in India. Now, we all should know that that is not how it works. Okay, these people in India have got nothing but a Nigerian man in common with the people in Scunthorpe. But the people in Scunthorpe, because they've claimed this marker now, every time they see this marker show its face up anywhere in history, they're going to say, well, Scunthorpians, because we have a 50% coverage of this marker, must be responsible for these aspects of civilization. And this is a playbook that we see play over and over again. This is what they're doing with genetics. There's a particular marker called R1b, which I'm sure you guys, well, some of you guys would have heard of if you're kind of into it. And R1b is found throughout West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, and it's must be very old because it's found in so many ethnicities. And remember how ethnically diverse Africans are. For it to spread like that amongst all the various ethnicities, it has to have been there for a really, really long time. However, they do all of their excavations in Europe, so they found the oldest sample, quote unquote, of R1b in Western Asia. And so therefore they say R1b is a Western Asian marker. And as a result, anytime R1b rears its head, sometimes in ancient Egypt, sometimes in Africa, sometimes in Central Africa, they go, oh, well, these Anatolians, these people from Western Asia must have traveled across and brought civilization. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Okay, it's been in Africa probably longer than it's been in Asia, but they never do the excavations to find those old bones that will prove that. They'll never do the work to see, you know, if these, in fact, a lot of the people that it occurred in don't even carry the genes that are possible for them to be Europeans. They just carry that one marker, and that one marker is enough for them to make those conclusions. So, yeah, I know I've rambled along a little bit, but I really wanted to kind of like drop home that point, because now I've done this example, I shouldn't have to stop the video again at the end, but I just wanted to kind of make that part clear. Okay, so I'm going to let it play on now.
And not domestically bred, and not as numerous as the Bengals. In fact, they keep relatively low numbers as a species. However, because they are so old, they are also incredibly genetically diversified with...
So you can see here, if it wasn't very clear, the leopard cat is analogous to continental Africans, okay, or to any, I would say even any melanated kind of indigenous people. So you could have even cross continental Africans with some of the kind of like maybe Southern Asians and other kind of older races, the races that are kind of older than the modern Europeans. But the bottom line is, these are the old people, the kind of original people that Bengal cats get their genes from. So that's who the leopard cat represents.
Each small group carrying unique genetic markers to the next. Whereas the Bengal breed, since they all descended from a...
So just that point there, I hope you got that as well. When populations are old, one thing that you won't see, and this is really important actually, sorry, I've said I would let it play, but I have to say this. When populations are old, one thing you won't see is genetic dominance of a single marker. You won't see it in old populations because it's impossible for that to be the case. They're too genetically diversified. Africa is 20 times more genetically diversified than the rest of the world. There's so much genetic diversity in Africa that gets ignored. So you'll never get a population, or you'll never get Africa, or even a population in Africa that has a 90% preponderance of a single marker. Okay, because they're too old. You'd have to do some serious inbreeding for that to be the case in Africa. Okay, they're all too old, and there's been too much movement and constant intermingling. As anyone who's African knows, people just constantly marrying outside of their ethnicity in African nations. It's more of a neighboring thing. It happens all the time. People don't stay strict to their ethnicity. They cross over constantly. And Africa has a massive and long history of doing this. However, when you cross over to Europe, R1B that I mentioned earlier, if you go to Ireland, 90% of Irish carry R1B. 90%. That is not a sign that R1B originated in Ireland. That's a sign that R1B was definitely carried into Ireland. Definitely. And it's also a sign that that population is very new. Hence, it doesn't have genetic diversity. There hasn't been a large opportunity for outsiders to come and to intermingle. It's a recent and small population that has very quickly blown up to become a much larger population, but hasn't had enough time as a population to intermingle with large amounts of outsiders to bring genetic variance in, like all African nations have. So do you see the difference there? So they'll use that. This is what you call database manipulation. They'll use that as proof that, R1B must be European because, hey, we all carry it. Whereas in reality, that it's just a sign that you're a new population. That's all it's a sign of. Let's go.
Few recent common ancestors had very high frequency of very few markers. One such marker was the LC1 marker, which they inherited from their leopard cat ancestor. They nearly all possessed this marker, but very few leopard cat.
So as you can imagine, this is just an analogy of an example I just gave you, like R1B, for instance, where because they're a new population, they all carry the same marker. So it's the same point that's being stressed here.
Cats possessed it, in spite of its origins being thoroughly Asian and thoroughly belonging to the leopard cat. As a result, even though the LC1 marker had been carried by leopard cats as a breed far longer than it had been carried by Bengal cats, in proportion to their numbers and population, there are far fewer carriers of this lineage than amongst Bengal cats. So
once again, this is just stressing that same point that I made earlier. Okay, you can have get rid of that comment. You can have if a population has kind of like 80% of the population carrying a marker, and once again, it's a sign of genetic recency. Okay, it's a sign of genetic recency. Whereas when you get much more genetically rich and diverse populations, it's very rare that you'll see the preponderance or the strength of a single marker kind of like taking, ownership of a whole population. It's almost impossible. Okay, so that's just, once again, just stressing that point. That's probably the third time.
The Bengal-centric Europeans leapt onto this marker, unanimously claiming it as the Bengal marker. Cat owners across Europe, massively excited by the attribution of a marker that overwhelmingly, but not at all uniquely, identified their cat's breed, began to use this as a means to establish an older date of origin for the Bengal cat than the one historically and anthropologically known to be correct. Suddenly, any occurrence of LC1 uncovered by archaeologists at any time frame were classified as Bengaloid presence.
So once again, this is now just stressing the point that this is a tool used to backdate presence. So many of you have already commented in the comments that how can they claim something that predates them? And this is how, once again, be it a genetic marker or be it a feature like, straight hair, slender nose, blonde hair, blue eyes, anything that has preponderance in their portion of kind of the planet and amongst their population, they will put this term on, this Caucasoid term, or Bengaloid if we're looking at the story, and they'll use that as a way to then claim it. And it will be done in a way where there's no regard. So for instance, they talk about it will be said quite openly, like the Anatolian population, okay, is 15,000 years old or something like that. I think it's about 15,000 years old, these kind of Anatolian farmers, okay, which, had quite a large impact in the Middle East and around the Levant region. Okay, a lot of these kind of like migrating farmers. Now they know that this predates the Caucasian expansion. The Caucasian expansion is only like 4,000 years old as an event, but yet they'll still classify these people of Caucasoid when there's lots of evidence to suggest that these people were anatomically African. So this is the what you'll deal with when it comes to these catch-all terminologies like Caucasoid. It's very deliberate. It's not accidental. Okay.
Now, fanatic Bengal-centric historians had the scientific means to place Bengals at nearly any point in history, subsequently forcing the leopard cat to be increasingly written out and replaced by the industrious and now ancient Bengaloids. Leopard cat achievements in Asia were now also assigned to the Bengals of Europe via the quasi-application of this catch-all terminology. The deliberate falsification of genetic testing provided the fuzzy logic and credible delivery mechanism that was required to fool the world.
So this is another really important point, and this is one I want to drive home. When it comes to anthropology, particularly in ancient Egypt that we're talking about, the Egyptologists know that they have lost the cultural continuity, the anthropological, the anthropometric, essentially every argument, the geographic, every logical argument when it comes to who the ancient Egyptians were and who the ancient Nile Valley peoples were. They know they've lost that now. The information is too accessible, and where they used to kind of gatekeep this using their books and hiding the artifacts, this information is now very accessible. So they've, essentially they know, and they've lost that side of the debate. So the new frontier is genetics. I really want to drive that home, people. The new frontier is genetics. They are going to be bending and twisting the interpretation of genetic data as much as possible in order to write themselves into a history where they don't belong. They will predate themselves into a history that does not include them. They will use terms like Caucasoid, and they will use markers that they've taken ownership of, and the quasi-interpretation of genetic information to say, we were here, this was us, we were responsible for this. They will create migration stories on the African continent that have no anthropological backing. I had someone the other day tell me, because a lot of Yorubas carry the R1B mark, I had someone tell me Yorubas are 40% European. That's what they literally told me. I was like, we got the R1B marker here, and we have those features in Europe. I was talking about facial features. I was like, Yorubas have this facial feature. He turned around and said to me, over the internet, I can't say straight face because I didn't see his face, but I'm assuming his face was straight when he said it. He said to me, Yorubas are 40% European. I was like, what the hell are you on? How are Yorubas 40% European? We are probably some of the most, we are not admixed. Certainly not with Europe, and we're certainly not 40%. Let's say there is a bit of admixture amongst Europeans. It would be tiny, absolutely minuscule. He said we're 40%, and that's because of some quasi-interpretation of genetic data. And the point I want to make is that they've created a story. Oh yeah, when 6,000 years ago there was a backflow of this people into Europe, into the European people. I was like, okay, cool. Where's the anthropological data to support that? Oh, we don't have any. It just shows in the genetics. No, it doesn't work that way. You can't anyone can make up a story as to how a marker got somewhere. Anyone can do that, but you have to back it up with some kind of anthropological data. Is there a migration story? Do you have a story of a large influx of European people into the area, into that area of West Africa? Do you have any of that? Is there anything? Is there any written tales? Is there any oral story? No, nothing. Just the I say so of a few scientists. It's absolute kind of, it's absolute pseudoscience. And literally, the approach of science now is to basically cast everyone as Caucasoid. All of Africa, okay, is literally part Caucasoid. and when you think about that, it's the total reverse. Now, here's an interesting question. Okay, here's an interesting question I'll throw out to everybody. if we know modern Europeans are 4%, no, sorry, they're about, is it 4%? I think it's 2.5% Neanderthal. And I think it's Asians that are 4%, Far East Asians. But if modern Europeans, let's just say, are 3% Neanderthal, what percentage are they African? Because that's not something that's ever dealt with. It's kind of like, well, they're Neanderthal and what? Neanderthal and what? You're Neanderthal and African, or Neanderthal and African and Asian. That's what you are. But how can they put out that they're 3% Neanderthal or 4% Neanderthal in the case of Asians and 0% African? So what was you? Are you just a result of Neanderthal and space dust? You came from Africans, so therefore you can never, ever, an African can never be more Caucasoid than a European is African. Do you understand? It's impossible. You are Africans, and this is the thing. Like, you're, whether or not they want to accept it, they are African, and it's almost as though the moment a person stepped foot on the European continent, they completely ceased to be African and they became 100% European. So that person could have landed in Europe, stayed there for 10 minutes, and when they come back, they're a Caucasoid. It's like, you know what I mean, one of your great grandparents, you know, just visits Italy. When he comes back, you know, his genes are suddenly European, and when he's breeding with the other, you know, Africans, now they're all 50% Caucasoid because he spent 10 minutes in Europe. That's literally how European anthropology works. It's absolute nonsense. It doesn't make any sense, but it's just that's the way it works, you know.
Indeed, the application of this new science could now permanently place Bengal cats as the original and only cat species worth even discussing.
So there you go. That's it. That is the end of the Bengal dilemma. So I think from the comments I'm reading, I think I kind of shocked everyone with how that story is interpreted. I think it's a bit wild. There's not a huge amount of kind of Egyptology in this, and I think everyone was expecting that. But the reason, just to give you a little bit of a, you know, logic behind why I did this video, the reason why is because I do get asked a lot of questions ad nauseum, and it does become, all of these questions require so much kind of backstory and explanation for me to finally get to my point before people will understand it. And I'm hoping that having this video, I'll be able to just use the analogy. Now, when people ask certain questions, I'll be able to say, well, think about the Bengal dilemma and think about how they apply the term felioid, or think about how they apply the term Bengaloid, or think about how they manipulate genetic data or whatever. But hopefully it just kind of gives in a relatively easy way to understand, it gives a bit of analogy of where I'm at. And I'm certainly not the standard for, you know, historical, you know, beliefs, paradigms, discourse. You're obviously well within your rights to believe what you like, but this, to me, based on the research that I've done, is what makes sense in terms of where we are at the moment. I think there's certain key aspects of it that I think are really important. So yeah, that's that. I'm gonna stay on for a bit. Please hit up the likes, ask some questions, and drop some comments, and we'll have a little bit of a to and fro before I close down the stream. Thank you. I'm glad about that. Thank you, Oliver, who said I've kind of sparked some imaginations. I'm really glad, because I wasn't sure how this would be kind of received. And I do know that these topics, to be honest with me as a content creator and a researcher, some topics are actually scary for me to broach, because I know that I could potentially lose a lot of people if I haven't prepped them right. You know, so for instance, European aristocracy is a big one. It's a big deal, something that I wanted to touch for a long time, but I'm delicately trying to kind of like creep my way into it, because I don't want people to think I'm a loon. This is what I thoroughly believe, and I thoroughly have research for it. And so it's really important that I present the research with the beliefs, otherwise it sounds crazy. Just like, to be honest with you, let's be honest with you, just like maybe for some of you 10 years ago hearing about Black Egypt might have sounded totally crazy, but it's because the evidence is being presented to you in a certain order and a certain packaging that you're able to accept it and go, oh, actually no, it makes sense. There's not really an argument against it. So yeah, it's really nice to get the positive feedback from you. Okay. Thank you, RJ Mackenzie, for saying it was a great breakdown. I appreciate that. I wonder why this isn't populating, wasn't updating as fast. Appreciate that. Talia said that it was very informative interpretation of the story of Bengal cats. Yeah. And by the way, it's not a true story. Can I say, everybody? The only true part is how Bengal cats are bred. But yeah, the UK will never turn on tabby cats like that. They love cats too much in this country. There is no cat cruelty based on cat breed that I know of. So this is entirely fictitious. Just to be clear. Yeah. Brilliant. Good night, Gypsy77. Thank you for saying it's awesome live stream. Oliver said I do scholarly level work. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Let's see if this updates. Yeah. Thank you. KW said you won't lose the ones who want to learn. You can't teach the closed-minded no matter what you say. This has been wonderful, eye-opening live. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's very comforting. And I also want to obviously say to people who are of European descent, of which I know I have a couple of followers, you know, I hope this doesn't feel like an attack, because it wasn't supposed to be. It's literally just kind of a true interpretation of the way that I perceive the world. And essentially, you can't control what your ancestors do, is the bottom line. And like I touched on as well, there are black people in history. There are some of my ancestors who have done incredibly shameful things, and a lot of fault in regards to where we are. At least, yeah, a great deal of fault can be attributed to melanated people, and that's something that I will go into. So, you know, history is a wonderful thing, and one wonderful thing about history is that it's actually not as black and white as people think it is. There certainly is nuance to it. So this, as much as this isn't an attack on Bengal cats, this also isn't an attack on Europeans. You can, like I said, you can't really influence what people who look like you or who are of the same stock of you have done historically. And to be very clear, there are some black people that I love and some black people that I can't stand. And there are some white people that I love and there are some white people that I can't stand. So yeah, just to be very, very clear on that point as well. Anyone who's kind of like in the comments, or even just watching silently, just to know where I'm coming from in that regard. RJ Mackenzie said humans suck, our ancestors got issues. True that. I absolutely agree with that. Shamani said, I really appreciate this broadcast and I really appreciate you sticking around and appreciating what I do. And I think on that note, I'm going to get out of here because it's relatively quiet in the comments. And yeah, and I think we've kind of covered what we need to cover. Please hit up the likes so people can check this stream out. Oh, also, I think someone put in the comments the second channel that I've got. Please do join that channel because I think I might end up posting this live stream in that channel because it kind of covers the more detailed aspects of anthropology and things that I'm going to be covering in that channel. In that channel, I'm kind of a little bit more willing to go back and forth with people and be a bit more kind of like thorough and a bit more argumentative if I need to be. And that kind of energy I didn't want to bring to my main channel. But if you're up for that and you're up for a little bit of deep dives and stuff like that and those kind of videos, please do join that other channel, which I'm going to put the link in now. Let me just quickly grab that. Boom. Oh, thank you, Kapruki. My man. Thank you, Kapruki. He's put it in the chat already. So please do, yeah, there it is. There's the channel. Please do subscribe. Join that. And we'll have a good time together. Okay? But good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me. It's incredibly late over here. It's a couple of minutes to midnight and I need to get some sleep. So I'll see you on the next one. Thank you again. And I'm out. Take care, everyone. Thank you.